Andrea. Planned, we'll be wrapping up. Thank you. This is the Pease Restoration Advisory Board meeting of May 17th, 2022. We are going to be doing a little bit of RAB business just to kick off, and then we'll move into our technical presentations and discussion, and we'll get into the rationale for not having pre-recorded the presentation, which is what we did last time. There was a little complexity around it this time. So we're doing sort of our old model of presentation and then Q&A and discussion with the technical team. And then we'll take a break and then have open discussion for RAB members for any topics on your mind related to the cleanup in this project at all. And then public comment is scheduled for 7:30, and we will wrap up at 8. Any questions about the agenda? Okay. All right. We want to approve the summary from February, that RAB summary. And I think we made revisions based on a couple of pieces of feedback. Thanks to RAB members for that on the draft. I think it should be ready to go. Anybody have any concerns at all? So we're good. We'll get, and then we can get that posted. It was like a very content-rich conversation. Let's do intros of RAB members. So I will call on people virtually who are RAB members, and then we'll go to the room and have you go around the table. Let's start with who is in virtually. Let's start with Dennis. Say hello.
Hello, Dennis Malloy. I live in Greenland, member of the RAB for a couple of terms. I'm also the state representative for Greenland and Newington.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jamie, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Jamie Payne, a public member of the RAB, originally the co-chair of this original PFOS, PFOA group of the RAB, and just excited to make it.
Glad to have you. Mark, you want to introduce yourself? Mark Metzen, you want to say hi? Oh, that's not working. Let's go to Sam Beam. You want to say hello?
Wait a minute, how about this?
Oh, there you are, Mark. Go.
Sorry, technical difficulties. Actually, I couldn't join the way the link worked. I had to do through the browser. But anyways, Mark Mattson, I've been a member, this is probably my 3rd term on the RAB, a resident of Portsmouth, and have just a mostly retired aquatic ecologist. So I'm very interested in the aquatic remediation part of the restoration.
Thanks, Mark. Let's go to Sam next.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm a 1st term on the RAB here, and I live here in Newington, and I don't have much specific remediation expertise yet, but I'm looking forward to learning a lot about it, and we'll continue to do so. And that's it.
Glad to have you. Thank you. Let's go to Mike Daly. Mike, you there? You want to say hi?
I am. Sorry about that. I just wanted to unclick my my mute and my my video. Hi everyone. Good seeing everyone. I'm sorry I'm not there today. I had intended to, but just some family health issues at home. So, I should introduce myself. Mike Daly, the EPA project manager. I work out of the Boston office.
Thank you, Mike. Let's go to Maria and then Peter Sandin.
Hi, I'm Maria Stoll, and I'm with the Pease Development Authority.
Thank you, Maria. Peter and then Matt.
Hey there, Peter Sandin, the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services project manager for Pease.
And
also
our
wish
host.
I could be there. Hey, I'm your host today.
Let's go to Matt, and then we'll go into the room, I think.
Yeah, Matt Casey, I'm the environmental manager for Pease Air National Guard Base.
Oh, thank you. Actually, Joan, you want to say hello?
There, hello. Yes, nice to see everybody. Joan Hamlet, I live in Portsmouth. I'm a state representative. And this is my first term on the Pease RAB. And I appreciated the slides and the information ahead of time, especially the list of translations of what all the acronyms mean.
An acronym list. Excellent.
Yeah.
Great. Am I missing any RAB members virtually before we go into the room? All right. Somebody, Cam, will you guide the intros around the table?
Yeah, why don't we start with Michael Donahue?
Mike Donahue, the other Mike, and I'm a resident in Newington.
And I'm Russ McCann. I'm also a resident of Newington, and I'm on my maiden voyage with the RAB.
Brian Getz, City of Portsmouth, and the Pease drinking water system.
Andrea Amico, I'm a Portsmouth resident, a co-founder of Testing for Pease, and the RAB community co-chair.
All right, my name is Chris King. I am the Air Force Program Manager for Pease, and I've been with you for about, what, 7 or 8 months now. And looking forward to some longevity with you and getting your interest known and this data and getting around to just having a good meeting and meetings to come. With that, before you move on, I would just like to say that I know you all were expecting this video, and we had to pull that back at the last minute on account of this new National Defense Authorization Act. I will get into that, but it was not our intent to do that. We just had to make sure everything was scrubbed to meet our obligations under those laws. Not only that law, but also the Freedom of Information Act, which we had always complied with. But we just wanted to make sure that the complexities of FOIA, that we are doing the same thing with the NDAA. Because of the fact that we determined that this primarily affects water samples, we were able to go back and look at all of our presentation materials that we had intended to present today, and very, very little change. What you'll see and what you're used to seeing previously is maybe a little bit of a tweak to the graphics. And that's basically because, again, I'll explain it a little bit further. There's a term called private property in the NDAA, and we just had to make sure that we were being as cautious as possible and making sure that we were meeting the intent of the law as we interpreted in the Air Force. But that being said, what you're going to see today is very, very similar, 99% what you're going to present to you. So I hope that everybody's happy with that. This is not in any way slowing down our efforts, our CERCLA efforts or RI efforts. It's only affecting the way we can share information at this point. All right, with that, I would like to pass it back, or Mona, go with the Brian Getz's update.
Yeah, I think we're ready. Is that everybody at the table except for the wood team? Is that correct? Okay, thanks. We see a lot in the room from space, but not everything. Yeah, I think we want to go to Brian for a few minutes and then we'll jump into the Air Force's content. Brian Getz.
The only problem with this hybrid, I don't know exactly where to speak to. There's people in the room, there's people out there, and then when I see myself, it's like this kind of delay. So if I get all flustered, don't worry. I don't have any slides. I do have a handout. So every year, as a public drinking water supplier, we're required to do our annual reports, and I think I provided the annual reports last year for Pease. We had Pease Portsmouth annual report. So these are just out. They are mailed to all customers that are put online, and I'm going to hand out and share with everybody here in the room. After I'm done talking, I'll walk around and hand the rest of them out. But essentially, it summarizes the water quality sampling, some highlights of last year. Of course, the biggest highlight would be the activation of the Pease, the treatment system, and the reactivation of the Haven well, which continues to operate. And so far, so good on treatment. And currently, right now, we're at about 200 million gallons treated through the combined resin and carbon system. So things are going well there. And also looking forward to probably a summer without having to use supplemental water from the Portsmouth system. to serve the P system. So that's where we're at. And lastly, the Safe Water Advisory Group recently had a drinking water forum, which Andrea and I co-chaired that group. It was quite successful. So if people are interested, if you haven't had enough tonight of the RAB, you can go over to the City of Portsmouth YouTube page and you can watch 2 hours of information about the Portsmouth/Pease drinking water systems, and it gives you a lot of background that goes back to the earliest days of when, prior to any Pease Air Base, that the Haven well was the Haven Springs. And then 1870 is when it became part of the public water system. So a very long history of drinking water here with the Pease water sources and Portsmouth. That's it. I can turn it back to Ona or Chris.
I think we're pretty ready to go to the Air Force. Chris?
Yeah.
All right, so what we're gonna do, we're gonna basically do what we prepared for this as if we're going to video record. So we would like to do that as well. And all of us have prepared our scripts and our thoughts already well in advance of what we're planning on doing. So we would like to attempt that approach. So bear with us, hold all questions till the end after the open discussion.
Can I, so Chris, having said, don't interrupt, now I'm interrupting. So if people have clarifying questions, if they think something's really unclear that you're saying, is that okay? We usually interrupt for that. Yeah.
Just
And
with the
then-
technical session, they start getting into their maps and everything. We don't want to break their train of thought too much.
Right. So we'll try to let the team get through the presentation. So everybody jot down your questions. We'll prepare for that robust discussion for afterwards. And for those who are watching on their Zoom, for the slides, you can control where the faces go. You can put them across the top or down the side so they sort of get out of your slide way with that view button in the upper right. Thank you, Chris.
Excellent. All right, so we're in the technical presentation part. I, of course, will do the Air Force, and the Wood team will take care of the remedial investigation updates. It's kind of jumbled, so you'll see us. You'll come back to me at the end. But that will jump into the next slide. All right, private well update. I know a lot of folks here are very interested in this. So the Air Force has been given direction on how to implement the December 2021 Department of Defense guidance regarding how and when state aid GQ can be used in removal actions. There are 3 conditions before we can do an action with the Air Force. And first is that the water well must first be below the EPA lifetime health advisory of 70 parts per trillion for PFOS and PFOA, but above any New Hampshire standards. Second, those private wells have to be hydrogeologically connected to other wells that exceed the EPA lifetime health advisories. This means that we must know a contaminated plume of groundwater with PFOS and PFOA in particular is migrating in the direction of that well. RRI has given us great models so far, and we kind of know the answer to these questions in most cases. That is condition number 2. And the third condition is we do expect over time that well will exceed the EPA or the federal standards if an action is not taken. And again, this is just showing we have to show that there is a hydrogeological connection and that plume is moving towards a particular private well before the Air Force can step in and take actions for a well that is below the EPA standards but above the state standards. And that's not just New Hampshire, that's everywhere. That being said, the Air Force has taken action so far, and we are currently working with the Department of Environmental Services and well owners to identify the affected wells and determine appropriate action. So I won't go into any specifics, that is people's private business. But we do include, not only connections to municipal water or a point of entry system, which we call a POET, where they make the most financial or engineering sense. It's good to know that the TES has really done a great job making sure that any of your residents around this area have had adequate treatment or provided bottled water or were given municipal hookups already. So we don't see a swath of residents that are drinking polluted water. So that's a good thing. We have some time, and we're going to go ahead and make sure that we do the right thing where we're required to do so. That being, look for a better solution, whether it be provide bottled water or some other longer-term solution. And eventually, to an agreement with the state. Okay. Next slide.
Hey, Chris.
some members of the virtual would like you to speak up and maybe a little bit more slowly. It's getting a little bit bumpy virtually.
Okay, I will do my best.
Sorry.
All right. All right, I kind of wanted to put everybody's mind at ease about the waste update and how we as the Air Force handle our PFAS-derived wastes. So the incineration moratorium part of the National Defense Authorization Act is fully in effect. So we are obviously required to adhere by that law, congressional law. So at Pease, we have done this by all of our generated wastes and are going, it's basically coming from the treatment plants. So Site 8 and Ames, most of which from Site 8. We're putting it in a Subtitle C landfill. Sorry, I forgot to cross off that class that's scratched out. But each shipment before it leaves the base, we give it a thorough review. So the Air Force and the Wood team approved shipping, properly trained. We go through all of the shipping manifests and documents to make sure that they are correct and accurate. And on top of that, we have a process in place with the EPA. It's an offset site shipment approval form that makes sure that our waste, particularly those that are how we characterize them from this operations, it can be accepted properly and it goes to the facility where it can be properly contained. Class C, Subtitle C landfills are they're built solid. They've got double liners, they've got water management control. That waste is staying there. Leak detection systems, leak detection systems, I've got a whole thing about the plants, but rest assured, this waste is being transported to these places and encased in those properly licensed facilities. Okay, we do expect this moratorium to end at some point. So the new rules and DOD guidance are expected in the future, although we really don't have a timeline on when that will happen. But yes, it is coming at some point. This moratorium will not be permanent. It doesn't mean that guidance won't mean that the disposal in a Subtitle C landfill isn't going to be the means in the future. It's just, we have to wait and see. All right, next slide, please. Am I speaking slowly enough now? Is that better?
No.
No? From the Midwest, sorry, speak quickly. All right, so the one that I'm sure everybody here is interested in is that section 345A2 of the NDAA. So this is where there's been some confusion on what can and cannot be shared, and rightfully so. As you can see, the verbatim text is the Secretary of Defense may not publicly disclose the results of testing of perfluoroalkyl and polyfluoroalkyl substances conducted on private property, key term, without the consent of the private property owner. Now this, we've come to determine, only applies to water samples. It's very generically applied to water samples. It doesn't say what kind. That being the letter of the law, surface water, drinking water, groundwater of any kind, we interpret as now protected under this particular NDAA, this law that is enacted by Congress fairly recently, signed in December into law. For those of you who have been around or have seen one of our access agreements, they do not address explicit data sharing. So we do not have explicit written permission by any private landowner or private property owner anywhere around Pease. Another one of the big interpretations is that, of course, is what is a private property? It's very specific under FOIA laws. It is not so under this NDAA. So what our interpretation for this is not, basically not, private property is any property not owned by the government. So whether it be federal, state, or city government, that's what we're dealing with here. So that's kind of the big change. But we want to make you rest assured that we are doing everything. The RI is not being slowed down. Our circle of removal actions are not being slowed down. Our treatment plants are up and running. All of that is going and will continue as planned. What is going to change, at least for temporary reasons, is what we can and cannot share. And so basically, this section makes it basically illegal for us to share, as written, any drinking water data, any surface water data from a private property without first getting that person or that property owner's express written consent to do so. Yeah, it's pretty tough. Now I know that may not be the interpretation of the writers of that document. We could discuss that during the open forum if you would like, but as written, the Air Force has to follow the letter of the law, and this is the interpretations that we currently have. This is not just an Air Force problem. This is not just a BRAC problem. It is all of the DoD, essentially all services, active and RAB. And so, yeah, that's kind of where we're at right now. And like I said, what this results in, at least for this presentation, is a few of the graphics have changed and become a little more generic. We don't show location data anymore for water samples, for instance. That is a protected piece of information now. You're not going to get hard numbers for now. You're going to get basically an assessment of what that is. Things you've seen before. It isn't going to change much. Like I said, what you're going to see for the remainder of this presentation is about 99% or so of what we originally drummed up and for the media that we had discussed presenting in this meeting today. All right, next slide. And then now I'm going to pass it on to the wood team. Sorry.
Can we comment on that at least? I mean, will that interrupt the flow of the wood team if we discuss that particular issue?
We're clarifying questions, please. Yes, bring it up.
I think, right, I think for clarifying questions, yes, otherwise we know there's gonna be a discussion about that whole issue. And if you can hold it for right now, we'll pick it up in like half hour. It's probably the first, it'll probably be the first topic. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's okay. Go ahead. Good evening, everybody. My name is Haley Plant. I'm an environmental scientist for Wood and have been the field operations task lead for the remedial investigation. And tonight I'm going to present a little bit about some of the field activities processes for the sample media that Hank and Amy will be presenting in just a little bit. So when we're out and about, we know that community members and members of the RAB can spot us and see us doing our work, but oftentimes it's very rare that we can provide an up close look at what we do. And so this is an opportunity that we can give you a little bit of a closer look and show you some of our sample collection details a little more up close. So to start, I just wanted to go over a couple of things. I know that many of you are likely familiar with a work plan. So we have our remedial investigation work plan. And this is a document that describes the work that we do. So it's the samples that we collect, the locations, the media, the analytes that we would collect them for and submit to the laboratory. But to complement that, we also have standard operating procedures, which explain how we collect these samples and how we approach the work. So this provides a consistent way that all of our field staff would approach sample collection, which allows for the integrity of the sample and for us to be able to confidently compare samples of the media that are collected. So these are all media specific. So as you can see, we have soil sampling, sediment sampling, surface water, fish and shellfish, all of which we'll discuss later on in the presentation. And just like the work plan, these standard operating procedures are subject to the same regulatory review process. So to start out, we've collected a lot of soil samples so far under the remedial investigation. And like many kinds of sample collection, soil sample collection is driven by the location and the depth of the sample. So we change our approach in a way that matches what our objectives are. So on the left-hand side, there's a direct push rig, which is a small drill rig, which would allow us to reach deeper soil samples. And some of the associated tooling is in the center top photo in the rack there. We've also used hand augers, which are used for shallower locations. And we've also used manual direct push tools. In any case, the prescribed interval from the work plan, the material from the interval is put into a clean stainless steel bowl, which is pictured on the right there. It's the material from the interval is homogenized with a clean nitrile glove or clean stainless steel spoon. And this is to prevent the sample that's collected and sent to the laboratory from being biased towards any one part of the interval. So it's homogenized across the entire interval and collected then into the lab supply container. When we collect soil samples of any type, we would record the sample collection on a field data record or an FDR. And for soil samples in particular, that information would include the soil color, soil type, so is it a gravel or clay or sand, moisture content, and sometimes there are noticeable odors that we might record. Slide, please. As you all know, we've also collected a fair amount of surface water and sediments across the RI. So to start with, we have freshwater and low tide samples that we would approach with HDPE tubing the same type that we would use for groundwater samples, and a suction pump, again, like what we would use for groundwater samples. And in this case, we have often have a PVC reach bowl, which allows us to target the intake depth of the tubing to the depth of the water column that we're looking to sample, which is typically, it would be prescribed in the work plan, but typically this is mid-water column. So you can imagine in a 3-foot stream, like the one in the top left there, we want to make sure that we're safely able to reach that, and that PVC reach bowl allows us to do that. As we're sampling, we'll collect physical parameters of the water, so pH, temperature, things of that nature. And for high tide and deeper samples in the bottom left, this is actually a high tide sample, so you can just barely make out to the left of the boat. There's a not so much on the screen, but perhaps those of you who are virtual, there's a temporary PVC marking pole, and that's the same location where the low tide sample was collected. So we know when we collect both low tide and high tide, we are going back to that same location to collect the second sample. We'd use the same approach as I just described, but we'd be on a boat so that we can safely access the location. Just to note, the high tide and low tide samples are homogenized once they get to the lab. They're both submitted to the laboratory and then homogenized so that the concentration that is received in the analytical results is representative of what the biota at that location would be exposed to. So along with sediment, or surface water, we often collect co-located sediment samples at the same location. And I think, as you can tell from the photos, when we collect sediment samples, it really kicks up a lot of that material. And so whenever we have co-located surface water and sediment, we collect the surface water first. So that is not influenced by the turbidity that's kicked up when we are collecting the sediment samples themselves. So this is similar to surface water and soil, going to be driven by the accessibility of the location and our target depth. So in the center photo, we're approaching the sample with a hand auger like you saw on the soil slide. But for shallower water bodies, we could use just a stainless steel spoon as pictured on the right. And again, similar to soil, we collected directly into first a stainless steel bowl, homogenized across the interval, and then placed into the lab supplied containers. And similar observations would be recorded on the field data record for the sediment as were for the soil. So the type and any pertinent observations. Next slide, please.
Can you just clarify what you mean by homogenized?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we collect, say, for the direct push samples, we have 2 feet of material. So that 2 feet of material would be collected into the bowl, and the entirety of that material is going to be mixed together so that it's what's from 1.5 feet and 1/2 foot, and everything in between. That whole interval is mixed together so that what ends up in the bowl is evenly mixed, and that way what ends up in the lab supply container isn't, just what's from 2 feet. It's truly a representation of the full interval. So last for you today, fish and shellfish sampling. So we approach this the same way you might do recreationally. That includes permitting. So we operate under a scientific permit, and we collect our samples So for shellfish, we have clam rake, dip nets, hand picking. And for the fish sampling, for the RI, we went out in a boat and used hook and line. The target sample for shellfish at any given location is 3 samples of 10 individuals of a species. So 3 times 10 mussels or oysters. And sometimes if you go out there, you may know that we are not able to collect that full number. So we are able to use a lesser number to cover that sample location. So when we collect the 10 individuals, target 10 individuals, all of the individuals from a location are then brought back to our field office. They're going to be shucked by our field staff, so the soft body is removed from the shells, and 10 individuals are submitted in one container to the laboratory, and the laboratory homogenizes these before analysis. On the other hand, the fish are submitted as one full organism. For these samples in particular, there are measurements and observations that can be kind of tricky to do in the field. This is pretty messy work, I'm sure the field staff can attest to. So we bring them back to the field office, as you can see in the bottom photos, take some additional measurements that are recorded on the field data record. And then at that point, well, for any samples of any media, from the point of collection until they're ready to be shipped by the lab, they are either on ice in a cooler or kept in a refrigerator in our field office. And once they're processed, FDRs are ready to go. They're all packed up in their appropriate containers and labeled. We have a sample tracking system that they are entered into, excuse me. We prepare the shipping documents for the lab, pack the coolers, and then send them off. At that point, we'll generally send an email that sort of passes the baton to our chemists and the lab. The chemists will track the samples through analysis, from lab logging until we receive the final data packages. And in the midst of that time, we have our tech leads like Hank and Amy, who begin evaluation of this data, looking at everything we receive back in context of this body of knowledge that we have built. So I hope that provides a little bit of clarity and what you can see us out there doing. And with that, I'll let Hank start off with soil and surface water results.
Right. Thanks, Haley. I'm Hank Adolsek. I'm the project hydrogeologist with Wood. And tonight I'm just going to talk about source areas and migration pathways. In the past RABs, I explained that the investigation approach, the RI investigation approach, the way we executed it, we looked at source areas, or we were going to look at source areas. We were going to look at migration pathways, and there's several. In the past, I've already covered one of those, which was groundwater. And we're going to look at potential receptors. And so tonight, it's I'm going to be talking about source areas and specifically surface water as a migration pathway. So on this slide, what you see is the peninsula, Great Bay to the left, and the river to the right. Little bay up in the corner there, upper left. The red outline is the former base boundary. And those polygons there, the gray and the red polygons, are areas, and there's 20 of them. There's areas that we investigated the soil for residual PFAS contamination. So we investigated those areas as potential source areas. And the red, and what we did there, we basically kind of peppered the site, with soil samples, like Haley was describing these in the mostly with geoprobe, direct push rig, and collecting the soil samples. And they were from surface soil samples generally down to the water table. So the areas in red are the areas There's 5 of them that exceeded the regional screening levels for PFOS or PFOA. And that level is, and it's a dermal contact exposure, ingestion, dermal contact. And that's 0.13 milligram per kilogram. So those areas there, and there's no surprise, those areas there, and the areas, the numbers coincide, and the polygons coincide with the legend on the right, so you can see what areas those are. There's no surprise there. Those areas, they did use PFFF in those areas. So the other piece of this that we don't have data on yet, but we're also looking at we're using chemical modeling to look at the potential leaching of these PFAS compounds to groundwater. And so these other areas, the gray areas, in some cases there was non-detect in those. In some cases it was trace or certainly below the regional screening levels. But we're looking at those areas also with respect to this leaching. So once the chemical modeling gets done, we'll be able to evaluate kind of the threshold concentration that could be, I guess, left in the soil that wouldn't cause, not that we're saying we're going to leave it in soil, but it's the level at which the concentration of soil causes a problem to groundwater. It elevates the concentration of groundwater. So that's coming down the road. We're still working on that. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to talk about next is the contaminant migration pathway created by the surface waters. And so the surface waters are the little blue squiggly lines here. And you know, if you notice the runways in the middle there, you can see the runway from the air photo, and all the surface water bodies all kind of drain from the center portion of the peninsula. They're going out. They're either going into Great Bay, they're going into Little Bay, they're going into the river. So they're flowing radially from essentially the high point of the peninsula, which is the runway and Site 8, which is at the northern end of the runway. And so all these surface waters, they start essentially as springs, and what that means is that there's shallow groundwater that daylights out. It comes out. It's exposed at the surface as a spring. So each one of these surface water bodies that you see there originate as groundwater springs from shallow groundwater. And also there's a subsurface storm water system beneath the airfield, and the most prominent discharge of that is McIntyre Brook, which if you can show that with the cursor there. That's that area there. So where that at the headwaters of that is directly from the stormwater system. Much of the stormwater, or some of the stormwater, I won't say much of it, but a good portion of it, maybe a third of it, is underwater, is under groundwater all year round. So in the middle of August, when there's not much rain, there's still water flowing out of at the headwater of McIntyre Brook. So that's what we call base flow. And so there's some other streams that are some other effluence points from the stormwater system that receive base flow. So that's direct groundwater. And so in some respects, you could say that those are actually springs also, because they are getting daylighting groundwater. So the surface water concentration at most of these streams are contaminated to in some degree. The concentrations at the headwaters of most of these is very similar to the concentration the shallow groundwater at that location. And in the last RAB, I talked about groundwater contamination as groundwater as a migration pathway, and I showed you maps that showed them the extent of that. So most of the or all of these locations here at the headwaters have pretty much the same concentration as the shallow groundwater at that location, but it's not true necessarily downstream. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. Next slide, please. So this slide I presented at the last RAB, and I'm just going to revisit it because it's very useful, I think. So what I meant by the contamination is not the same downstream. So the concentrations in these streams generally doesn't vary too much from the source area down to the discharge area. I mean, there is some dilution going on, but it's still contaminated. But the groundwater underneath it is not, it doesn't follow that same pattern. And here's why. So the seep on this slide here, circle that's the daylighting groundwater. So the yellow to the right of it is the upper sand aquifer, which says US. So that's the shallow aquifer at Pease. And there's a deeper aquifer, the lower sand aquifer, the orange, and then below that you get into bedrock groundwater. So between the upper sand aquifer and the lower sand aquifer is the marine clay silt, and this is it's a very clay silty material, and it varies in thickness, and it's not continuous across the whole peninsula, but it's quite extensive. It doesn't allow a lot of vertical migration. So as the shallow groundwater in the upper sand daylights at these springs, and now it flows down as a brook or a stream, it's sitting on top of the marine clay silt, and it's not going vertically. It's not draining through this marine clay silt because it's essentially impermeable for the most part. And so that's what's keeping the lower sand from at least at the downgrading extent of these streams from being as contaminated as the streams are. So next slide, please. So here's the summary of the data for surface waters. Again, just to kind of refresh each one of these streams, the headwaters, the concentrations are similar to what we found in shallow groundwater at those locations. And as you go downstream, there is some dilution, and but generally the groundwater beneath it as you go downstream is much more diluted. From a risk perspective, there are several surface water bodies that and that includes Watering Springs, Pickering Brook, Flagstone Brook, and Paul Brook that exceeded the regional screening levels for children's swimming. Now, whether or not you can actually swim in those water bodies, I'm not going to make that call. But so there are a few that have that exceed the regional screening levels. These colors on this map, the labels, all the labels, if you see a label on a stream, we sampled it. So everything on here pretty much we sampled. So the color coding on this map reflects the groundwater concentration. And I in previous RABs, someone had asked if we can make the color, because we had dot plots in previous, which we're not showing now, but we had dot plots previously shown in previous RABs, and I think at one point we had a different scale. The surface water wasn't the same as the groundwater, and someone said, "Well, why don't you make it the same?" Well, it's the standards for groundwater in New Hampshire aren't applicable for surface water. However, from an understanding standpoint, to kind of wrap your head around it, it is useful to just to see, to be able to compare. So that's what we did here. We're comparing the surface water to the groundwater AGQS standard in New Hampshire. It's not applicable, but it helps you kind of put it into the framework of groundwater contamination and what I've shown previously at previous RABs. So if it's red, if the label on the screen is orange or red, it exceeds the AGQS. If it's red, it exceeds it by a factor of 10. And this is just for PFAS. I'm just showing PFAS here. There's a similar distribution for PFOA and PFHXS. But PFAS seem to be pretty representative of kind of a summary of what we're finding here. So, and I mentioned before that the concentration of groundwater it doesn't follow the same pattern that the surface waters do. So McIntyre Brook, and you can just circle that again. McIntyre Brook is right there, and that based on the groundwater standards, it's elevated. It's a factor of 10. But if you were to put a well in, we have wells in there, and take a water sample, we're at trace levels in the groundwater below that. And that is due to the fact that you have a marine clay silt that is preventing that vertical migration going down. So essentially, that silt creates effectively a culvert, a natural culvert that's preventing vertical migration of the contaminated surface waters. That's about it. All I have to say right now. I'll certainly take questions after we're all done here. I'm just going to pass this over to Amy, and she's going to talk about fish and shellfish results and sampling.
And I just want to say to do a time check right now, we're at 6:25. We're supposed to go break at 6:40, so we might push that break back a little bit, but just wanted to note that for everyone right now.
Thanks. Great, thanks, Hank. I'm Amy Clinton. I'm Human Health Risk Assessor with Woods, contractor for the Air Force. For those of you who don't know me, so I'm going to be talking about fish, shellfish, and eggs today. I will try to project to the owl, but definitely let me know if anybody can't hear me in front or behind. So these are potentially complete pathways, two of which we had not sampled previously. Shellfish, we had sampled during the expanded site inspection, as many people will remember. So we did a lot of resampling in shellfish, as I'll talk about as we go through. And our main purpose of looking at these media is to see, is there a potentially complete pathway from PFAS to move from peas into fish, shellfish, and eggs? And the reason we're looking at those is, of course, because people can eat them. So it is, can PFAS from peas get into the human food chain through these foods? So the first one that I will talk about will be from surface water. So Hank talked about surface water and how PFAS can move into surface water. And we know that surface water has a certain level of PFAS in it. And from there, it can move into freshwater fish specifically, and can also move into shellfish. And we'll be talking about marine shellfish here. And then the other pathway I'll be looking at is the eggs. So Hank has also done a bunch of discussion about groundwater at the past RAB, and we know that we have a certain amount of PFAS in groundwater. And in some private wells, it is extracted and it can be used to water chickens. And once chickens have PFAS in their water, then they can excrete it from the eggs. So those will be the pathways that we're discussing. So just do a big picture first, and then we'll talk about a few more details. So fish, shellfish, and eggs. The freshwater fish, these are fish that we sampled in the Peverly drainage system. So we'll go into the map and we'll look at where those are. It's an area where fishing is currently prohibited. So it's important to note that no one is currently eating these fish. And definitely have PFOS concentrations above risk screening levels. I wanted to just make a small clarification. Haley was absolutely correct that we sent the entire organism to the lab, but what was sampled was actually a fillet sample. So they sampled the piece of fish that allegedly would be eaten if someone was to cook it up, cut it up, and actually eat it. So it was not the entire fish that was sampled. So if the entire fish were sampled, we would expect probably to see higher concentrations because the offal tends to bioaccumulate even more than the muscle tissue for fish. So we know we have exceedances of risk screening levels for, and I also want to mention that I'm going to be talking a lot about PFOS specifically. So when we talk about animals and bioaccumulation into animals, it's typically PFOS that is the primary driver. So it has uptake factors tend to be higher. It tends to be the chemical that we detect and in higher concentrations. So you will see more discussion of PFOS, but we will talk about the other chemicals when we get to the figure. So freshwater fish above risk screening levels, shellfish concentrations of PFOS were below risk screening levels. The other PFAS were not detected in shellfish at all. So that's why they're not mentioned here. And then as far as eggs, we won't get into a lot of detail with eggs. Part of what Chris was talking about, the different rules around data sharing, we have very few samples of eggs. So not enough for us, unfortunately, to do statistics or to provide summary data. But we will, we did detect PFOS specifically. And so we have identified a pathway there, and we'll talk about what our next steps will be for eggs. So I'll start off talking a little more about eggs. This figure we showed last time, it shows all of the sample locations for the entire backyard produce sampling event. So that included the homes that we sampled for vegetables, fruits, and also pasture grass. Out of those 12 total properties, 2 of them were watering chickens with water that was identified to have PFAS in that water. So our selection process included, soliciting residential input. We had those residential questionnaires that we sent out. We spoke to homeowners to find out if they were actively watering chickens with private water. We sampled that water to identify if there was PFAS detected in the water before sampling the eggs. We'll go through this starting with the left side. So we'll start with the arrow. So how does the PFAS get into the chicken? Well, chickens are, not only are they drinking the water, but they're also eating the soil. Chickens use soil as part of their digestive process. They tend to peck around. They pick up little stones and eat them as part of their digestion. They also eat insects as well. So they have several things that are potentially going into a chicken which could have PFAS in them. So all of that, potentially can go into the chicken and then can be excreted in the eggs. So as part of our sampling program, we also sampled not only the water, so the drinking water that is groundwater, but that the chickens are drinking, but we also sampled soil that's in the chicken pens to see how that compared. And we also sampled the chicken feed just to see whether or not there was any potential PFAS influence from the chicken feed. So moving to the right side of this figure of this slide. So we collected whole egg samples, but there's also research out there suggesting that PFAS tends to be found primarily in the yolk. So we also looked at yolk versus white to see if we were seeing the same trend. And as I said, there were only 2 homes sampled. So unfortunately, it's just a very small data set at this point. So we don't have enough information really to be able to share it in any more detail than this, but we did detect PFOS and we will be evaluating it further. We'll be evaluating it further in the risk assessment, and we're also proposing to collect more data. So we'll be resampling likely those homes should we be given permission, but we also may be expanding that out a little further, possibly looking at homes that have previously watered chickens to try to expand our net a little bit. So we'll see where we go from there. So in just a moment, we're going to switch over to GIS and we'll look at the figure. It will be a repeat of the figure that you received, but also we have the ESI data on Hank's GIS as well. So we can see how the ESI round, that's the expanded site inspection round that we did in 2018, and how that compares to the RI round that we did. So first, I'm going to talk through this Fox plot legend, which looks really complicated at first. There's a lot going on this slide. So the figure is just a snapshot of the RI shellfish data. And then if you start on the top of this figure, you will see PFBS, PFOS, and PFOA. So what we're showing here is the EPA Region 1 screening levels. And there's been quite a bit of mentioning of the screening levels so far this time. But I want to be clear that these are the 2017 screening values that were developed by EPA Region 1. These are likely prone to change in the very near future. So EPA is in the process of adopting the ATSDR tox values, which will drop all of the PFOS and PFOA values by an order of magnitude, so times 10 lower. And there will also be values for PFNA and PFHXS. So that is a change that's coming. Currently, this DoD policy is to continue using these values. So I will talk when we get to the figure a little bit about how the results would change were we to adopt those new values. So those are the numbers that we're looking at here and we're used for comparison. And then if you look at the color chart on the left, you will see that all of the shellfish either fall under a gray, white, or green. And so either it wasn't sampled and none of that was an intentional not sampling. Essentially, if it was there and it was sufficiently abundant, it was sampled. Ideally, it was 10 individual shellfish. Sometimes it was 8, 7, 4. It was basically what we could find, we sampled. So if there's a gray square there, it wasn't a lack of trying. It was simply they weren't abundant in that location at that time for the sample. So again, as I said, it's gray, white, or green. And so the white are non-detects. You're going to see there's quite a few white squares. And then green is detected, but it's lower than that tier 1 screening level. And we would see some changes to whether or not there are any orange squares if we would adopt those ATSDR values. But we'll talk about that in a little while. So the final square on this legend. So as I hopefully mentioned earlier, all of the 3 boxes are always in the same order. So it's always going to be PFBS first and PFOA last. And the stacking will also always be the same. So they're stacked and there's a whole bunch of different media shown. First one is going to be surface water, that has a W. The next one is sediment with an S. Then it's blue mussel with an M. C is softshell clam. 3 is softshell clams if we found greater than 3 inches. And the last one would be oysters. I noticed there still says max in a couple of places on this that we didn't remove. But anyways, if there was, as Haley mentioned, there were sometimes 3 replicates, up to 3 replicates taken for each species. So it just means 3 separate samples. So what we're depicting here is the maximum concentrations for the highest of those 3. So we'll just look at the fish box plot quickly, and it's essentially the same as the shellfish with a few key changes. So when we're looking at the screening levels on the top, the fish values are similar to the shellfish values, but they are a separate value that's used for fish. And another key difference is when you look at the color chart, you notice they're orange and red, and indeed the red do show up for fish. So red is more than 10 times above the screening level. So the overall story for fish wouldn't change if we adopted those lower values. It would just be, then it would be greater than 10 times, it would be greater than 100 times. So they are not a great surprise. Freshwater fish do bioaccumulate PFOS very, very rapidly, and we did see that here.
Amy, I just have a quick question.
Sure.
What, like, is that McIntyre Brook? Like, what is?
If this is Peverly, so you're looking
Okay.
at Stubbs Pond
Okay.
right here, and the second one is Upper Peverly Pond. There was a lower Peverly Pond, but it's gone. So,
And do people eat from this?
no, this is all, fishing is prohibited. It's within the wildlife reserve. So there should be no fishing. We reached out to, I forget exactly, but I think we reached out to the reserve and talked to them about poaching, whether or not they had caught anyone or were aware of poaching going on, or illegal fishing, I could say. And they had not had issues with illegal fishing there, at least that they were aware of. So we're reasonably confident that nobody is eating these fish currently. And we'll talk a little more. Yeah, so there's different species here that are depicted. Obviously, they're not the shellfish species, so these are the fish species. We were able to catch largemouth bass, and there are, it's hard to see on this figure, but there's largemouth bass were caught in both the upper pond and in Stubbs Pond. And sunfish and chain pickerel were both caught in the upper pond. They were not caught in the lower pond.
We also attempted to catch eels. We set out eel traps for a weekend or several days, and we were not able to catch eels during this sampling event either.
To make some money.
Hmm?
Make some money.
We think, I mean, it may have, there probably are eels, but it was later in the year, and it's possible they just weren't terribly active at that time of the year. So it was probably a matter of timing. But as you can see, we were attempting to catch 2 or 3 different fish species per each water body, because PFAS can bioaccumulate very differently per species. You can see, some species will be just way above screening levels, and sometimes we see species that aren't, and there's not always a lot of rhyme or reason to it. So it's best to just sample a wide variety. However, in that bottom pond, we only did find, or in Stubbs Pond, we only did find the one species that we were able to catch. Switch over to GIS for a moment and just go through the picture.
And then we should be moving toward the switch soon, if we can, to Chris. Thanks, Amy. I know you're going to keep going.
I can do my last 2 slides fairly quickly too, so.
Zoom normally. All right, thanks, Hank. I think Hank is showing right now the RI shellfish data. So this is the same data set that was depicted on the figure that you looked at, that you were provided in the pre-rad materials. So I think probably a couple of big picture things on this, but first let's start by just kind of just reminding you what we saw on the legend. So there's 3 boxes that are stacked in each of these, right? And they're always in the same order. So PFPS, PFOS, and PFOA. And the PFOS, generally, if there's something detected, in fact, PFOS was the only chemical that was detected in the shellfish. So it's not, it's only Ochoconoo that we call it. And you can see in most cases, it's white. There's not a lot of cases in which it was actually detected. So a few things I want to point out here. All of the locations that are on the peninsula itself, so they're kind of clumped together right now around, you can see the border, the outline of the former Pease Air Force Base. These are all targeted locations. So they're locations that are either at the very end of a discharge, a surface water discharge, or there's somewhere where we had reason to believe there could be PFAS that was connected to Pease. And then there are 2 locations on the other side of the water, and those are both reference locations. So they're locations that are they're not associated with a specific discharge from Pease, a little different from the site, distance from the site. And we didn't do a Hampton Beach location this time. In the ESI, we had done a much further away location, but we found no impacts in these 2 reference locations that were close to Pease. So we just stuck with those for this event. Okay, so just briefly, what would change if we looked at the ATSDR tox values? We would see that these detections, so if you could scroll just a tiny bit, so that we can see. So we'll start at kind of looking at the top. Tricky's Cove and Broad Cove did have some detections, and those both would exceed the new screening values if we were to lower it by an order of magnitude. And I want to mention too that so the new, upcoming possible potential new screening values. And there are also, because we are in the state of New Hampshire, there are state-specific screening values too that we also, do consider because we are within, within New Hampshire. And the state-specific screening values will actually be slightly higher, so less conservative than the new Tier 1 EPA values. So,
Amy, sorry to interrupt. Can you speak a little more slowly for the people on the virtual? Thank you.
You told me to hurry, Ona.
Sorry.
Okay. So these new screening values, the way that they compare to the New Hampshire values is that they're just slightly lower. So if we talk about what the results are with relation to the new upcoming screening values, that's also very similar to what the results would be if you use the New Hampshire specific screening values that we would consider for shellfish. So we did, just to see what it would look like. We did run it with that, and we have, we do have exceeded some screening values, but the next step, when you exceed screening value, because these screening values are set at 10% of the safe level. Okay, so that's why when we're looking at a screening value, we say, well, is it above? And then we say, well, is it 10 times? And that 10 times is not arbitrary. It's 10 times because we've set the screening value at 10%. So, it's an important factor. So when we look at these screening values, if we were to use the new ones and we were to look at the exceedance, it's not 10 times above. It's still within safe thresholds. So are they still having trouble hearing me? Sorry, I've seen that popping up. So I think now perhaps Hank, if you could put on the ESI data. What we're going to do is we're going to show the ESI and the RI data side by side, and kind of go into Tricky's Cove. So this is Tricky's Cove, where we've typically, or in the ESI, we found the highest concentrations, and that was the same. We saw the same trend this time, but it was a little bit lower. In general, the results were lower in this round than during the ESI round for the shellfish, and there were less detections overall than we saw last time. So for example, so the ESI data, so the 2018 data, look at this chronologically, is on the left, and then the RI round is on the right here. So if you see the oyster on the bottom, the O, there was a detection in the ESI, and there's no detection for the RI on the right. So although it was sampled. So essentially, I think Hank's just going to kind of give us a little tour of how these relate. And then here we are at Broad Cove. And again, there's an oyster detection in 2018, but not in the RI round. And now as we move into the west side of the peninsula, these locations were not resampled, so it's only the RI location. They were identified as potential data gaps. So we didn't have data there before. And we said, well, maybe we're missing something. In some cases, there's not a specific stream, or there's an outfall that doesn't have high levels of PFAS in it, so they weren't initially targeted in the ESI. So these locations were sampled, and they were all non-detect in the BIVAL data. So, and you'll notice too, the sediment is also non-detect. There is some PFAS showing up in the surface water, and in many cases, it's all three: PFBS, PFOS, and PFOA.
As you did for Tricky's Cove, can you just announce where each of the locations is when Hank scrolls there?
Yep. Yes. So now we're here. This is Woodman's Point and Manning's Island. The RI data, these are showing up side by side, and the ESI data was a kind of a combination of the two. But the RI data is actually, I think, only at Woodman's Point. And again, there was a detection in the mussel in the ESI, but there's no detection in the RI for the same biota. And here, this is the outfall where Stubbs Pond. And again, you see an oyster detection for the ESI, but not the RI data. A little bit of difference in abundance there, some reservoirs that are different for each one. And here, this is the outfall of McIntyre Brook. And there was less shellfish found this time, but also oyster. We didn't find a detection, even though we did have oysters. Clam, the results were similar. Let's just do the reference locations. Yeah. We'll just look quickly at the two reference locations, and then we'll look at fish. And the reference locations, again, were unimpacted as far as the bivalves are concerned. We did see a little surface water detection in both of those. So Hank's just showing the reference locations on the left side of the screen now. All right, let's put the fish data on. Yes,
Amy, if you and Hank can try to really focus on the takeaway points where it's most important, and then the participants can ask about specific things and we can zero in also during Q&A, that would be great.
I know we're getting there. So there's nothing really additional to show in the fish, so we can be quick on this one. We basically already talked about what those different species are. So again, there's a Stubbs Pond and an upper Peeberly Pond. It's not the highest surface water body on the entire peninsula, but it is one of the largest, the one with fish that would technically be fishable. So we did find, pan-sized and larger. I think the one largemouth bass that we caught in Stubbs Pond was a good sized fish. So there are good, fishable, healthy looking fish in Stubbs Pond. But as I said, it's fishing is prohibited currently. So, all right. I will reshare my slides and we will shortly. All right, so just in summary, so fish, again, we had PFOS that was above those risk thresholds, currently prohibited, and it will, of course, be evaluated further in the risk assessment. And then shellfish, no health concern when we look at the new values or the New Hampshire specific values as well. So that basically backed up or even showed, more positive results than the ESI data did for that round. And then eggs, PFOS, as we said, was detected. So it will be evaluated further in the risk assessment and additional data collections proposed. So that's everything from me, and I will hand it back to Chris.
All right, really quickly, I just wanted to share with the group some new upcoming projects that do not deal with PFAS. This first one, it's going to be legacy systems and demolition. So for those of you who aren't in the know, there are roughly 8 mothball treatment systems from the legacy sites that are still out there. Some of them in a fairly bad state of disrepair. So this project, which will be awarded probably in the coming months, will be to evaluate those systems and get rid of up to 8 of them if they're deemed not usable anymore. So that's site restoration and beautification with hopes of one day being redeveloped. Next slide, please. And this last one from me, so we can get to our break. We're going to be reevaluating some fuel sites that are currently, they're all part of our long-term monitoring program. So a pretty intensive monitoring program that we currently have. For this specific project, just because these sites have been out there for a long time, that we want to reevaluate them, make sure that the active remediation that's currently in place should remain, or if something else needs to be done to make sure and bump up the treatment levels around those sites. But just wanted to let the group know that PFAS is not all we're still doing here on Peas, and we'll keep you in the loop as these projects start kicking off and start doing their field work.
Just clarify what's mothballed mean.
It just means they were kind of left in place and they just stopped running, and so now they're in just disrepair. Okay, that's it for me.
Thank you. So let's take down the slides. I think because 2.5 hours is too long to go without at least a brief bio break, let's take just like 5 minutes. People can get their thoughts in order. Everybody stretch, presenters get a glass of water, and then we'll start up in 5 minutes. So 6:53 with RAB discussion about all of that. Thank you, everyone, very much. We're going to get started again. I'm sure that felt fast. It was fast. Can the room be unmuted so we can hear you?
Yeah.
There we go. All right, welcome back. Can people hear? Or can those in the room help get people's attention? Thanks, Peter. I saw the thumbs up. sorry, I know, especially for those of you in person, that was probably like lickety split quick. But we want to jump into conversation with RAB members. And I think Mike Donahue, you had the first question, so we'll go to you. And then we have 4 questions from Jamie Payne in the chat that we'll just work through one at a time. RAB members who are on the Zoom, feel free to raise your virtual hand. There's that little raise hand button at the bottom, or put a note in the chat if you would like to get into the queue. RAB members who are in the room and would like to ask questions or share thoughts, please put your name placard up or catch Cameron's eye, and he's going to help us keep an order. But if it's okay, I'd like to start with Mike Donahue, have some discussion about the topic he's raising, and then we'll go to Jamie's questions and move from there. So Mike, over to you. You are muted.
We're good. I'm muted. Some people would like to do that to me, but they're not here. Chris, I guess I want to say to you, I think you take this very seriously in having, encountered this difficulty about the Defense Authorization Act, but this has been a problem apart from that with this group since long before you came and joined us. We more than once, and I've had this dialogue with Hank in some of the technical, very good technical sessions we had last February, let's say. We often feel as RAB members that are here trying to help the Air Force communicate to the community these issues, that we in particular have one hand tied behind our back because the authorizations that were originally pursued to obtain the participation, I guess, of our local citizens in Newington in particular, in this case, this didn't really emerge as a big issue as it related to activities on the base with, the serious issues there. But now that you're essentially off the reservation with this, and you are dealing with entirely private property, this has been an issue since I came to the first meeting I came to, and there are people that have been here longer than I have that have found this to be difficult because we're put in a situation where, and it comes up, Amy, it's all over this issue about, what size do you make these areas that you check on, whether it's for the gardens or whether it's for, now it's chickens. You are relying on information that you have that you can't tell the public about. Can't tell the RAB members who spend a lot of time trying to look at this stuff, not as much as you guys do, I'm sure, putting it together and thinking about how to present it. But we put a lot of time in trying to understand it, and we have a great deal of difficulty because we run into this stone wall of, we cannot tell you where the wells are that are giving us this data that's causing us to, even at the RIFS phase, exclude these particular areas. And the fact that it's now in the National Defense Authorizing Act, the House of Money here, I hope that gives more attention to this issue. I hope that results in a directive that your access forms years ago should have been changed. People can refuse to sign them. People can say, no, I'm not going to do it. And they say, or I will only do it if you keep this in a locked safe somewhere. But my belief is the vast majority of the citizens in Newington, all they want to do is know more about what the problem is. And they would have signed something that was properly prepared that allowed this information to be available. So, and this is not of your making. I see you have this tremendous burden of, you know, and you had to take back information, which I'm sure was a fire drill and, you know, not fun, but it doesn't surprise us at all. This is a problem at a much higher level built into this whole thing. And it really affects the ability of the RAB to help you. Never mind the citizens to support you once, you know, once you're really going to make a decision here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Let's
I
invite
really appreciate
Chris.
that comment and your willingness to bring it forth on this, you know, during this venue. I mean, it's you have a big voice in it. You know, I think that was a wonderful comment to have. And I don't want to call him the congressional representative. Would you like to step in? I know you guys have some things. You probably need to pop up.
Hi, everyone. For those of you who haven't met, I'm Elizabeth McKenna with Senator Sheen's office. Chris just asked me to kind of share an update on, you know, this section of the NDA. So the overall, so I think the quote you had up there was the subsection. The 345 section of NDA aims at overall greater transparency. That was Congress's intent of that section. So from our perspective, we do think this subsection, we do not think this subsection should have affected ongoing data sharing that's been taking place for years, you know, and going on in the community. The Department of Defense has taken a bit more of a conservative legal interpretation of the guidance. So we've met with the Air Force, we've been meeting with the Senate Armed Service Committee, other stakeholders, trying to come to a resolution about this. I don't have anything more to share than that at this time, but we're definitely looking into the issue, trying to make sure we get to a resolution quickly for folks so that we continue sharing that data with the public. Because that was the transparency and greater transparency was definitely the intent of Congress. So try to work through that language there.
But yes, until the Air Force has to follow the letter of the law, and I presented to you the interpretations that I was given and how the Air Force is implementing this currently. We're also trying to keep it consistent in the Air Force. I mean, this is, as you know, this is a broad brush with this one. It's not just brackets active as well. So there's going to, you know, obviously we hope some changes are made soon. Maybe the Senate can take care of that quicker than we would hope. But until that time, we have to stay our course. And again, I appreciate your comments because yes, this was a burden for me and also the team. And it's just nice for you to bring that up in such a way. Thank you.
Can you just circulate a permission?
It's
That's
not
our
easy.
point. You know, can't you just go and, you know,
Well,
we had 2 chickens checked.
I had the conversation. It's yeah, you know, it's somebody shows up with this form all of a sudden out of the blue. You want to share this data now. What does your gut reaction tell you? We don't, that's my personal opinion. Of course, that's not a representation of the Air Force, but things are in the works. Let's just put it that way. The Air Force is obviously, like I said, trying to keep things uniform throughout the service. And so things are in motion. And we'll just keep you posted as we make some progress throughout this.
Thank you. Let's go to Jamie's question. Jamie unfortunately had to step away, but he had 4 pretty clearly formulated questions in the chat. So the first one is whether, here, I'll read it. The Air Force is a Department of Defense entity and is following their own 2021 direction on when to consider state statutes when they clean up ambient groundwater. What are DES and EPA's thoughts or comments on the 2021 guidance? That is the first question. So Mike or Peter, thoughts on that one?
I'll certainly say that we're thrilled that the Air Force now has the ability to step in and take over the private well response for those houses that were exceeding our standards, but below the EPA's lifetime health advisory. So I understand that there are some constraints placed on how they make that determination, but it seems as though they're able to address all of the properties that were still in question.
Thank you. Mike, do you want to add anything to that? Daley?
I don't. I'm not completely clear on the question. I recall when we talked about this last time, I think Sharon's on the call. Sharon talked about ARARs. So you have, ARARs come into play once you establish that there's unacceptable risk, and then, then you start, then ARARs become, identified and discussed and considered. So I'm not sure if that's what he meant. I'm not really sure what he means, but
let's go with hoping Peter answered it. And then I think Jamie will circle back, I'm sure, and look at the notes and the response, and he can follow up with us if that doesn't. Thank you. Next question in his thread was about public disclosure, which was related. And I think maybe we feel like we're just sort of waiting for a moment on this, but I'll read the question anyway, which is, has the Air Force sent out, or do they plan to send letters to the affected property owners asking if they're okay to provide information to the public? So have you thought of going back to places where you had access to also ask about sharing information?
Yes, of course, that is a discussion that's ongoing. I don't have an answer for it yet. The legal folks are talking it out, but I want to let the group know that any information that we as the Air Force collect from a private property, we absolutely give it to them. So it's we're not withholding any information on private property from the property owners. It's general disclosure to the public that's currently at issue with the NDAA. That being said, like, the lawyers are working on some things, and so is obviously the Senate. You heard from them earlier. So collectively, we hope to see some resolution here fairly quickly.
Thank you.
I have no timeline for you.
Question 3 from Jamie. Are similar wildlife reviews being done at other Department of Defense facilities in the United States? Do we have other facilities to compare to? And if so, do they have similar results near areas of 10 times RSL?
In general, the results are similar. They're exactly what we expect. In freshwater fish, we expect reasonably high concentrations. In marine shellfish, typically they don't bioaccumulate high concentrations. So essentially, yes, the results of these are reasonably similar given the AFFF source.
Thank you. And final question from Jamie, and then we'll go to Mark and then Andrea. Are all the streams that were shown on the surface water map with 10 times RSL considered freshwater? Are any of those streams tidal in nature? And if tidal flushing occurs, is it a concern that levels are still 10 times RSL?
So if we're referring to the map that Hank showed, that was 10 times the AGQS, which are groundwater standards. So it's not a relevant risk threshold. Hank was showing that really to give some information about how groundwater is discharging to surface water.
As a migration path like the ground.
Right. There's nothing that's 10 times the RSL in surface water.
Thank you. Great. Let's go to Mark Matson next. Mark.
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah, I'm afraid my dogs are going to fire off in a minute because my wife just returned home, but I'll try to get these in. The first is a general question about this NDAA 345A2. It seemed a bit ambiguous about what's private and what's not. And specifically with respect to the water body sampling, do streams, surface waters of the state of New Hampshire, the Great Bay Estuary, waters above and below or below high tide mark and surface waters, are those clearly public, or is that still to be resolved in terms of the availability of information from the sampling there?
Well, what is what's private and what is not is it's for the NDAA purposes. Private land, like I had mentioned, is anything that's not governmental or tribal. So if it's owned by even a business, a private business, it is considered a private property. So if the US federal government, your state government, a tribe, or a city township piece of land, that is all that is considered public. And so everything else, my understanding of surface water streams in New Hampshire is that you can, if a person can reasonably access it, it is public. It is public. Your coastlines are public, and that's why we were able to show you the shellfish or the water, the co-located water samples there. And so that's kind of where we're at on that. And then, of course, all the lands in the wildlife reserve, those are considered those governmental properties. So those we can show you that information as well. Those lakes and the streams and such that we're running through those lines.
Okay, so being able to show the presentation on fish and wells and shellfish and sediment and surface means those places pass the screening for public.
And remember, the NDAA section 345 A2 specifically applies to water as it is currently written. It doesn't specify what type of water, just that PFAS samples from a water sample. So that right now that is being deployed for all types of water. Not just drinking water, not just surface water, or not just groundwater.
Okay, so will the data that was summarized in the Wood presentation on sediment, surface water, fish and shellfish be available? Because, well, the reason why I'm asking is I'd like to take a more, the devil's in the details. I'd like to take a deeper look at it, and like I did in the past. And I can't really react much to the summary at this point. I'm just a detail person.
Yes, we will be providing that, Mark.
Okay, I mean, it doesn't have to be tomorrow, but thank you. And then related to that, noticing, kind of related to Jamie's question about the streams, McIntyre Brook, stuff like that, that run into the bay, and certainly a portion of each are tidally influenced because they're unimpounded. And those with 10X RSLs are nursery areas for bait fish that feed the fish that are commercially and sport fished for in Great Bay, like striped bass, for example. Specifically, they can be, I don't know if they're all being used, but nursery areas for and spawning areas for river herring, which are alewife and blueback herring, perhaps shad, that become incorporated into the marine food chain by feeding. I mean, there's several publications that demonstrate that 10 pounds of herring equals 1 pound of striped bass, basically. And that also implies bioamplification. So are there plans down the road to maybe look at some of these diadromous spawning species sample for contamination?
So there are a couple of different things that I want to bring up in relation to that. So this particular assessment was very focused on the human health exposure pathways, right? We're looking.
No, understood.
Right, so I just briefly, there will be an entire ecological risk assessment. So when you're talking about heron and other marsh animals, that will be dealt with in an ecological risk assessment separately. So that's one thing. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is this freshwater. PFAS migrates really readily through freshwater, as Hank has depicted, and as we've talked about. But it doesn't seem, partially because of the dilution, but also partially because of the salt water. We don't tend to find as high concentrations in those tidal areas that are influenced. So I think it's we wouldn't expect, and we typically, someone else asked about other sites, other DoD sites, is what we're seeing here similar to what we're seeing on other DoD sites? And we do have that experience of other sites where we have done large saltwater marine sampling programs for fish for one reason or another. And typically they're all below screening thresholds. The concentrations, when you compare them to the freshwater fish, tend to be significantly lower. So at this point, there's, we're not necessarily thinking of going out and sampling marine fish for a few different reasons, but that's related to human health. Ecological risk, they may make another determination. We haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, I was specifically, in this case, asking about human health because of the consumption of striped bass. Relatively easy to sample and test without trying to build the whole food chain connection, which would undoubtedly be through these anadromous forage fish species. And anyways, you might want to consider that, if nothing else, other than to allay fears. And finally, I guess, and this is sort of a soapbox thing, and I'm kind of a half empty guy sometimes when it comes to this stuff, but I'm not really assured that because we're finding levels in shellfish species below RSLs, that I'm ready to go out and start eating them. And I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Mark. Let's go to Andrea.
I have a lot of questions, but I think I'll start, I guess, with the NDAA. I guess I have a reaction, a question, and a request. My initial reaction is that, this is deeply disappointing, that this is the DoD's interpretation of the NDAA. As we heard from Senator Shaheen's staffer, Elizabeth McKenna, that that was never the intention of the NDAA. If anything, it was to improve transparency and data sharing. At the national level, I can tell you there's a lot of community members from DoD sites across the nation who are meeting with high-level DoD officials such as Richard Kidd and Paul Kramer and hopefully Dr. William LaPlante at the Pentagon level to really push the need for more community engagement, data sharing, transparency, and that this action and this interpretation is actually moving in the exact opposite direction of everything that we're trying to do. And so it's just deeply frustrating to me and disappointing that we're at this meeting and not being able to really understand this data that we have been waiting for a very long time for. So I'm frustrated, and I'm appreciative of our congressional representatives working quickly to try to resolve it as soon as possible. I guess my question regarding it is that it's my understanding that this data also cannot be shared with New Hampshire DES. It's not just members of the public. And so my question is, how is this affecting New Hampshire's DES's ability to do their job if they can't receive this data? And then I guess real quick, I'll just say my request is that once this issue is resolved, can we have a commitment from you, Chris, that if we need additional meetings to get the data in a more comprehensive way, and if we have more questions, will you commit to holding additional meetings for us so we can get the data that we should have gotten tonight, but we don't have?
Well, I just want to reiterate that we withheld nothing from you guys, that we weren't, this turned out to be almost a 3-hour planned presentation. We didn't have, there was no water slated on the docket for tonight's presentation. So we withheld nothing. And that being said, in the future, when if we come back to the RI water data, this may still be a hindrance. That being said, we can discuss whether it's necessary to delay a future RAB or schedule a technical breakout session or many of the options that are available to us. Of course, I want to provide the answers that you all need. It's your communities, obviously. I have to follow the rules of the Air Force. I follow the rules of these laws that are on the books. But yes, I understand your frustration. I appreciate it. And this honestly, this came out of nowhere. And it's hence the last minute pulling of the presentation just to make sure we were in compliance. And so, yes.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add that, I hope in the future we can go back to the pre-recorded video presentations, because we heard last time that was very well received by the RAB, that they could view the video ahead of time and really digest the information. And even tonight, receiving the slides ahead of time and listening to the information real time is quite overwhelming. It's highly technical. And so being able to have that ahead of time is so critically important. So I hope moving forward, regardless of the NDAA resolution, any meetings that we have, we can make sure that these video presentations are available, because I think it makes for me personally, it makes a tremendous difference in absorbing the information. So with that, Peter, can I just ask you to respond to the question that is this, data, this inability for DoD to share data with New Hampshire DES, if that's true, and if so, how is it affecting your ability to do your job?
And if this continues for much longer, it most certainly will affect my ability to participate in this process. I know at this point there's the discussions occurring at the congressional level. There's the discussions within OSD and the Air Force lawyers to try to resolve this. There has been some outreach by the BRAC program to DES to see what we can do in the short term to agree to receive the data and not disclose it. Those talks are slated to happen soon, so I should be back in the seat of being able to review the data. But yeah, without the data, definitely my hands are tied, and there's a lot of it that we need to really wrap our minds around as we move forward with the next field season. So very anxious to get this resolved, certainly.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrea. Can we go to Russell? Anybody? Russell.
A couple of different questions. Some are just my own clarification. So on your sampling, when you're homogenizing a sample, if you're taking a core sample, what is the depth of the core sample? And are you doing it at intervals of homogenization?
So that would be prescribed in the work plan. So for instance, the source area direct push soils were continuous 2-foot intervals. So it was, 0 to 2 feet, 2 to 4 feet, and so on for the depth. So that's prescribed in the work plan, but it's that whole interval would be.
And then that's cross-referenced against the type of material that you're pulling out. So you're getting a kind of a view of the subsurface.
Yeah.
And then on sampling, was it just kind of where the streams that have contamination exit into Little Bay or Great Bay? Was really the reason to choose those particular locations.
So the locations, I might have to defer to Hank a little bit on this one, but there were a lot of different locations that were selected for the RI that were potential, some discharge areas, some were for risk, but I'll let you go into that more detail.
And the way my worldview of this, the way I look at it, Amy does risk. I do consumption site model development. I look at the geology, the interaction between groundwater and surface water, and how contaminants move from where they were put on the ground to where they might end up. And then we also look at along that whole pathway, we look at potential receptors. That's what Amy does. And so these surface waters, Peninsula is kind of unique because all these surface waters are spring fed, and so their groundwater, they transmit groundwater. So I don't think of them as there are surface water, they're technically surface waters, but I think of them as just kind of conduits for accelerated conduits for shallow groundwater. And it comes out and it's just a migration path. So we sampled them, we sampled them all just because it's like, okay, let's just see. I mean, this whole, the area of contamination in groundwater beneath the peninsula is big. And so all these leaks in the groundwater system via these springs could potentially be contaminated. So we just looked at them all.
And it's been developed over years too. It's
So-
not something we just went out and did in the RI, like we've started this.
Right.
many years
So
ago.
you did Broad Cove, and Broad Cove showed green for, I think, oysters. However, you didn't go back to Fox Point, and Fox Point's for all the commercial oystering.
Yeah,
And
so-
you have a water pipe that goes perpendicular on the town that should be carrying water, ambient groundwater fairly easily to that Fox Point area. When you push crushed stone underneath, you're actually creating a means of the water transporting easier. Right?
Yeah, yes, that's true. But at Fox Point, most of the water is going to be kind of shedding out into the Broad Cove and then the west side there.
I'm thinking of the Durham facing side where there is also a lot of oyster farms.
But we haven't, any groundwater contamination in that area.
What I'm just saying though is the pipe goes through that area, which could possibly contain it. I'm just interested in the shellfish aspect of it. So both on that side of Fox Point and on a little further north of Broad Cove, all of the oysters from New Hampshire are harvested right in that area.
We do actually have a surface water and sediment location that didn't make it onto that figure for some reason, but there is a sample location on Fox Point, just on the northern.
That's from the SI.
No, it was from the RI, and it didn't have a co-located shellfish sample with it. We just basically did it as a data gap to see what the concentrations were there, to see if there was any potential risk, because so basically the Tricky Cove and the Broad Cove, those are the main discharges for surface water, right? And as Hank mentioned, that was our primary, this is how PFAS is getting from the base potentially into the marine waters. But like you said, there could be other preferential pathways. There could be, this discussion of whether or not there's any direct movement of groundwater migration. So we did take a surface water sample up there, and it's also below the RSL, it's similar to the other concentrations. So I don't know if that helps.
Are you going to do any further shellfish examination?
We'll probably talk about that more in the next RAB. I don't know, exactly what the outcome of that is, but as the results were quite a bit lower this time than the last one, this seems like a pretty good confirmation round that what we found is pretty accurate. So talk more about that.
Thank you. I would like to invite RAB members who haven't had a chance to ask questions or make comments. If you would like to get yourself in the queue, to raise your hand or put a note in the chat or put your name placard up. And also kind of last call for members of the public who would like to make public comment. We have one person who put a note in the Q&A, and I'll give Arnie a chance to make public comment. But if there's anybody else who wants to, please let Linda or me know in the next couple of minutes. So let's go to Mike Donahue.
I defer to anybody that hasn't had a chance.
Anybody?
I did have a chance. Okay. So when you made the presentation related to the results, you focused on the areas where you were comparing the RI results, the more recent results, the prior testing. You didn't say anything about the two areas on the west side of the Upper Newington Peninsula, where, and apparently also on Fox Point perhaps, where although you didn't find shellfish, you were finding surface water to at least be detectable in that those areas. And you've told us the standard's likely to change. So we don't know whether that color is going to go from green to orange. Or
The surface water stays green. So
okay.
yes, you're right.
Well,
I did not mention that, but the
Yeah,
surface water.
no,
and all
I'm
the
not
green areas.
criticizing you. I'm just saying, so we
You
didn't
can
get
criticize me, it's good.
we didn't get to have, we didn't get to have
Thrive on
that, we didn't get to have that discussion. So when you see in our, because I remember from all the technical sessions, it was, there's no reason why we're going to find it over there, and that's why we never checked it before. So you opened it up and you checked, And, as a result of, your own investigation, I'm sure. But I'd like to think it's because of those technical sessions we had, because you were leaving out a whole area where a lot of people have been doing it. So now that you see it, how do you explain it? Why is it is it in surface water there? Because it's actually in Great and Little Bay? Is that what it is? I hope not. I hope it's that there's some other alternate explanation for this.
Well, I can tell you that they're very low levels as far as related to the screening values. Like I say, they stay green.
So I don't know if it's, it's maybe some groundwater influence or maybe that surface water influence. We haven't done that evaluation yet.
Could it be that it's in bedrock that's emerging there? That was one of the things we discussed in the technical session.
I mean, that's possible, but the data that we're seeing so far isn't not making that likely.
And that data includes all this water samples from wells that we can't discuss yet.
Currently, I mean, some of it's from residential wells, some of it's from monitoring wells, bedrock wells that are on private property.
Right.
That's
I mean, that whole area is private property. Okay?
Exactly. So,
So
We're not-
this
I'm not
is
seeing a
the
connected
conundrum we have, okay? I just
Yeah.
want you to understand that.
no, I understand your frustration.
Well, but it's trying to help you rule out an area where otherwise there can be public concern, legitimate public concern. Same thing, Amy, back, where we're going here, back to the situation. You got it with chickens. You say, okay, there's only 2 areas that have chickens. Well, I'm sure there's not only 2 areas in New England where people have chickens. And I realized that you tied all this to, they have to have contact with these wells from that water. It has to be water that you already know is, by some results, is polluted. This is at the early stage. This is when we should be trying to find out the broadest way to say, all these areas are really clean, and we can say it because we've done this, this, and this. And it's the same thing with the gardens. This is the question that I asked you at the last session that we never got, there wasn't enough time to answer it, and I certainly understand that. And we never got together afterwards. But with the gardens, if you put up your slide, you're gonna show that you excluded almost the whole west side of the Upper Newington Peninsula. Areas where you know that water in those areas is almost sheet flowing on the ground. Those are areas that are very much like your description, Hank, that you gave us, where there is so much marine clay that the water just never gets down into the groundwater. And I just think you've got to be more open to looking at this, or you've got to find some way to give us that well information without property lines or something that people can understand. People can totally accept this. Thank you.
Thank you.
And one more thing, turkeys. If you got this problem with chickens, you have a massive problem in Newington with turkeys.
Yeah,
There
you're
are an
not eating the
enormous
turkeys.
number of turkeys all over Newington. Thanksgiving Day on my front lawn, 38, okay? They were massing up. And
Amazing.
you gotta figure out a way. You described how chickens eat from my casual observation, turkeys eat in a very similar way, only they eat more. And they are all over the place in all of these areas. And you've got to test them.
So, well, thank you, Mike, also for the laugh. Let's go to public comment and fold that in, and then we'll move toward giving all the RAB members a moment to share final thoughts. Thank you to all the RAB members for your questions and comments and work trying to communicate what's really important to the residents and to the community, to the Air Force as they do this work. And we have two people who have expressed interest in sharing public comments or questions. A reminder to the RAB members, there's not an expectation that you respond to or answer these necessarily, and you're going to have some time after they share, so people are welcome to. So let's go to Arnie, and Arnie will give you the ability to talk. And you can unmute yourself. Yep, now go ahead. You have up to 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. My name is Ani LaRich, and I'm from New Hampshire, but I live in Oscoda, Michigan, after retiring 10 years ago. And the Air Force Base here has a similar contamination issue. My question is regards the presentation given by Amy of wood, the box plots of using the RSLs and the fish samples specifically. And she mentioned there was an earlier set of RSLs, and I'm pretty sure those were provided by the regional office, EPA, to the teams back in 2017. That's when I saw them from your minutes of the RAB meeting. And then she mentioned that there's upcoming ATSDR and more restrictive. So my question, first part of my question is, where can we get the references to those new, slightly more restrictive criteria? And when did your team start using them in your investigation? And I'll leave it at that.
So current DoD policy is not to adopt them yet. I provided that, but it wasn't in the slides. I just provided it because those values are coming. The reason I say that they're coming is because DoD defaults to US EPA, right? This process is working under CERCLA, so it's EPA driven and EPA policy driven. And the regional office provided those 2017 values based on the toxicity values that were in the lifetime health advisory. So they're inherently tied to the lifetime health advisory assessment. Those tox values were incorporated into what we call the regional screening level calculator. So we talked about those regional screening level values. There's an online tool available on the EPA website for anyone to use called the RSL calculator. And so that calculator is what was used by Region 1 to create those 2017 values. It had those tox values from the lifetime health advisory populated in there because that was what EPA chose to use. EPA said, these are the best values available for PFOS and PFOA. This is what we are going to use. So when Region 1 calculated the 2017 values, those tox values were already populated in there, and they already have basically all the other defaults. They just selected an appropriate ingestion rate for shellfish and fish. So currently, why I say these new values are coming out is because the RSL calculator has been updated. So EPA is in the process of, every 6 months, they update their generic tables. So they produce a set of tables called the RSLs. And every 6 months they do an update. And when they do that update, they take any new, better final toxicity values that they have selected as following a certain hierarchy, the best values out there, according to EPA, and they populate those into that RSL calculator. So if you were to go into the RSL calculator right now and put in the fish or shellfish consumption rates that were used in those 2017 values and just run the calculator for PFOS and PFOA, you would get the new screening levels, and they're in order of magnitude lower than the current screening values.
Thank you. We're not going to keep going back and forth, but thank you, Amy, for
Yeah, I
responding.
just want to add real quick, if I can, Honor, that everything Amy said is spot on. And yeah, and so yes, there's information or there's new tox data within that, but there's going to be some forthcoming sort of, I think, follow on to that, sort of those updates to the RSL calculator. So I can tell you that, pretty sure of that. So not yet, but I think something's coming. So it'll provide some more context as it relates to those updates. And perhaps there's always, I think, some general questions or things that are sort of considered, or how they should be considered, I guess. So, to be coming soon. And then, there's other ongoing efforts by the agency to also look at, more recent tox information. And, again, there's plans to reevaluate, or there are plans underway. They are reevaluating the current health advisories for PFOA and PFOS. So that's coming down the road. So there's a lot of activity, and again, this is what makes the job really hard, is we try to make some decisions with these data that we have, and with best science and the toxicity information, that the best toxicity data that we have to make these sort of decisions. So it's unusually difficult, and I've never sort of experienced this in my career, is basically trying to collect data, and then 6 months or a year later, we're having to reconsider all those decision points. So it's that frustrating, and it's that sort of complex and fluid. So I just want to point that out. We're trying our best. We're trying to stay ahead of where the science is taking us. So, but it does pose a unique and really challenging problem for this kind of study. And this is a huge study, as you see. So lots and lots of things to consider.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Arnie. We are going to then go to Nate Gifford and allow you to make your comment if you would like to share.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So my name is Nate Gifford. I'm a lab technician at Dartmouth College, and I work in a marine biology lab where we study PFAS. And so my question is for the Wood team, sort of about your methodology. And I'm wondering what time of year were the fish and shellfish samples collected? And would you expect that these concentrations would change depending on the season?
Answer the first part and then pass it to Amy. So the samples this year and during this year were from November, and the SI were August or November. But the RI were collected in November this year.
Yeah, when were the ESI ones? Because we did it twice, and one of them was done.
They started in 2017. They were collected in November, and then we collected them again, collected them in August.
Can you repeat the answer? We didn't hear that online.
So the data that were presented were from the ESI were from August of 2018.
Right, so we now have a round from August and November, so kind of bookending the year a little bit. So we'll be evaluating whether or not there's any potential for fluctuation, seasonal variability. It's not something that at this point I think would be likely to change the overall picture, if you see what I mean. Essentially, everything that we found so far is relatively low concentrations. It's not showing that there's a lot of uptake into shellfish, but that is definitely a point that we're going to be considering when we do our data gaps analysis and look into it a little bit more. We'll see. Basically, we have to see if there's other sampling rounds in other other bases or other similar research that we can rely on to see if such trends have been seen in bivalve health anywhere else.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we are going to move into our wrap up now. Thanks to everyone for that back and forth and all those questions and responses. That's so helpful. I think we want to just a few next steps, like we'll review a few next steps, and then we're going to give RAB members a chance to share kind of final thoughts before we adjourn. And really, I think most of the next steps are fairly basic. We'll get the meeting summary from the previous meeting posted online. We'll draft the summary from this meeting and post the recording. We will, it sounds like the Air Force or Wood team are going to be able to share the data, or when they can, with the RAB members that today's presentation was based on. They will do that. And I think those, then there are a few kind of other small pieces to follow up on, but I think those are most of it. I think we would love anybody who's on this, if you want to send any comments to maybe Cameron, can you put your email in the chat for people virtually? And then we can send out a follow-up to the full RAB. If you have feedback on how this meeting worked or suggestions for what would make it work better, we're kind of trying to keep evolving our model here. We'd love your feedback. Chris or Wood, any other next steps before I give everybody a chance to share final thoughts?
No, I really like this. I like this venue and this approach. I think you said we were worried about glitches, but I kind of thought that one off without a hitch. But I'd like to see more people in the room. But yeah, I thought that went pretty well.
Thank you, Chris. Well, maybe I'll have. Let's actually. I'm going to call on all the RAB members who are present and just give you a chance to say any final thoughts. And let's start with Andrea. Go, and then it'll be Samuel.
Sure. I guess my final thoughts are I'm glad that we're finally able to meet in person. And I also agree the hybrid meeting worked well, you know, given all the technology and everything. So thank you to everyone that was able to make that happen and coordinate that for us. I think we have better synergy when we meet in person and we can discuss issues more. So thank you for that. I appreciate the information that was able to be shared tonight. I still think it was lacking in the detail that I was hoping to get. You know, I think that there's a lot of focus on just a few PFAS compounds. And one thing I've asked repeatedly at meetings was to share the data on all PFAS. You know, I'm really curious to know if there were other PFAS detected that you didn't report on your maps and things like that. Because that's still a significant concern to the community is all the PFAS data that you collect. But overall, I'm appreciative of the meeting. I wish that there was more detail. I hope that we can have resolution to the NDAA interpretation and that we can continue to have productive meetings moving forward. And I just want to thank everyone who was here tonight and thank the consultants for the information that they were able to share with us.
Thank you, Andrea, and for all your hard work between meetings to get us here as well. Sam, and then Mike Donahue.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, I thought it was a good meeting, and I would have liked to have been there in person, but we do have COVID in the house, so I thought it would be better not. But I appreciate all the technology set up, and I am also, I understand the rationale for focusing on sampling that, you know, directly impacts, you know, things that human consumption, but I'm also interested in long-term, if there's going to be a program or if there's a phase, and maybe this shows my ignorance of the process and how it's laid out, but if there's a phase where these compounds are monitored as they move through wildlife and the food web in general, and then maybe back into something humans can consume, since it's not a you know, one sample type of thing, since they move so much. And then yeah, I'm curious, and I would hope the issues with the NDAA interpretation, et cetera, can just be resolved by getting permission from the affected property owners. But I'm curious how likely that is. But I guess we will see. But that's it.
Thank you. Mike Donahue, and then Joan.
I'm just going to pass. I have plenty of time to talk here. I'm just going to pass on some thoughts from Peggy Lamson, who is a longtime member of the RAB from Newington, who was unable to be here tonight because she had another governmental meeting. She suggested, and I think it does dovetail actually well with this problem we have, regardless of how it plays plays out with the, the recent act of having permission to disclose information. Her suggestion is that we have some sort of meeting in Newington in particular, since where you have this private issue with all of the people and with some sort of directed, focused discussion about where you're at, but what else you need to do and how it would help to be able to disclose this and see what resulted from that. But you got to start reaching out to those people in Newington anyway. And I know you've tried to the survey thing, but everything in, I haven't lived there all my life, but everything that happens in Newington sort of happens because, of the 800 people that are there, a good portion of them turn out for a meeting and learn things. So,
Great.
and I mean, it's incumbent upon the leadership in Newington to be helpful to you in doing that. I mean, I don't for a minute think that this is going to be successful if it's just thrown on you to do. But it's a suggestion from her. She's been there a long time. She's a leader in Newington. I think we should look into it.
Please thank Peggy for her suggestion. I appreciate that. Joan and then Dennis.
Thank you, Ona, and thank you, everybody. And thank you for letting me attend remotely. We do need to work on the sound system for the remote viewers. I'm just I just got over COVID myself, so I'm hoping to attend in person a few times in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Dennis and then Mark.
Thanks. Disclosure is the issue here, I think, and it's been mentioned, and that's amplify that.
Great, thank you. Mark and then Russell.
Yeah, thank you. Again, I'd like to echo Andrea's sentiments and some of the others that the devil's in the details. And I'm also very interested in what Dartmouth College is doing here in the Bay with regard to PFAS and PFOA, and wondering if we could have a presentation to the RAB if it's at a point where it's presentable at one of the future meetings.
Thank you for that suggestion. Russell and then Mike Daly.
Well, this is my second RAB meeting, so it's very enlightening and wonderful to be everybody in person. I think from what I was hearing tonight, I would like to kind of look at more of an expansion just on the sampling of the shellfish in the Fox Point area and over in that where the commercial fishing is going on. Just double check. There's one area that I didn't talk about before, which was the stream that comes off Captain's Landing. And I'm not sure if that goes all the way out to the bay. And I know that dries in the summertime, but there are a lot of people that take soft shell clam there all the time. And so I just, I think that's something that's interesting and something that impacts the public health. So it's important.
Thank you. Let's go to Mike Daly and then Maria.
I just wanted to actually compliment the team. I'm really impressed with the technology, and I know the audio was a little bit maybe challenging, and it was at times, but I would say it was pretty much flawless. So kudos to everybody that made it happen. So I don't have anything else really to say. I thought it was a good exchange of dialogue and thoughts and concerns. And I just repeating what I had said just a short time ago, that again, as I think the challenge for the team, and not just this team, but all across the country, as we consider to try to collect more data, as we get more information, more toxicity information for more PFAS. Again, the the decisions we make today we may have to revisit or reconsider, and it all sort of ties back to, again, having enough data to sort of go through the process of evaluating risk to human health and environment. So, that's been the challenge. It continues to be the challenge. Kudos to the Wood team, kudos to the Air Force, as far as, again, trying to use best science, and understanding that some of these other complications with regard to the sort of the privacy and, Privacy Act related issues, and that's in the statute, the current statute as it relates to data. So I know it's frustrating, and I can certainly appreciate, people in the community, certainly DES. So I can appreciate the frustration, and it doesn't make things easier, that's for sure. But with that said, I think we're making some good progress. I think we're making forward progress. I don't think we're going backwards, at least in regards of having a lot of sort of curveballs thrown at us as we collect the data. We seem to sort of proving out some of the thoughts we had initially as part of the ESI. So that's a good thing. So as I see it, so, again, continue to move forward.
Thank you, Mike. Maria and then Peter.
Yeah, I guess echo some of what Mike said. Thank you for the presentation. A lot of work. It's a huge study. I do appreciate being able to participate virtually. I thought the hybrid meeting worked fine. I liked getting the slides ahead of time and then kind of put the meat on them at the meeting. That worked well for me. And then just to mention another thing that you talked about, Chris, I'm interested in hearing your plans about demoing, dismantling those mothballed systems, and look forward to working with you more on that. And that's it.
Thank you. Peter and then Matt.
Yeah, it's a shame that that we were kind of pushed sideways by the data sharing problems, because there's so much really good work that's been done, and it takes away from the accomplishment to date. And I wish we could have talked about it in more detail. And I look forward to resolving that. The flip side of that coin is I really appreciate the voices of the public, and also in the work that's being done at the congressional level, because that's where this problem is going to get solved. And kudos to you. So let's hope it's quick, and the next meeting is a little more in detail.
Thanks, Peter. Matt and then Brian.
Yeah, hi, I don't have much to add, except I think, everyone did a great job presenting. And one recommendation I think I would have is to just include like a general schedule of the RI field work, and maybe reporting as to when the draft might be out and how long this is going to go on for. Just in general might be a good idea moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you. Brian and then Chris.
Oh, no, I don't have the ability to see who the attendees are, but is Dr. Tarmath an attendee by chance?
Dr. Tarmath, yes.
Well, there he is. Good. So I know Dr. Tarmath just has a couple weeks prior to his retirement. Want to send best wishes to him. He's the first person with the Air Force I had contact with 8 years ago, and he's been a very good partner in this whole process. I want to wish him a well-deserved and earned retirement, and best of luck.
Thank you. Nice. And then I'm going to interject before you go, Chris, and say for those who are following in the Q&A that there is a presentation at 1 p.m. on June 14th by the team at Dartmouth, who are presenting their preliminary findings. 2021 and 2022. So again, that is June 14th at 1 p.m. I think in the DS office, and we think it's open to the public. And then
they were laughing at you, owner. You froze for a second, so we were all. They were laughing
like a monster.
They were being mean.
And then let's go to Chris. Final words, Chris, and we will adjourn.
So I just want to say, I really do appreciate the community coming to these events. Today was a very productive discussion, and I think it could have gone off the rails and it didn't. So I really appreciate everybody kind of sticking to their guns and letting us know what we needed to hear, but keeping it on track. And thank you especially to Ms. McKenna from the Senator Shaking's office for coming out and sharing her opinion on us. I think that was very helpful for the group. We know that there are people all around working on the main issue we're seeing or discussing here today. And I guess over the next month or so, I'll be contacting Andrea and the rest of the community members to figure out what I think we should cover in the next round. Because right now, there's a lot of unknowns that may impact what the subject matters are. But there are a lot of things to talk about, and we can figure it out.
So I want to, sorry to interrupt, Chris. Steve Termoth wants to say something, so I'm going to allow him to speak. One sec. Jump in, Dr. Termoth. I think you raised your hand, and I think you can speak now. Steve Termoth, you want to speak? Now's your chance. No.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, okay. I had to click 2 times on one microphone, another place, but I just want to thank Brian for his kind comments. And PEAS was obviously the first for a lot of us and the first major thing that had anything to do with drinking water. And so a lot's been learned from our work at PEAS. And I certainly have enjoyed all my interactions with everybody up there and want to give great kudos to all of you for the time and effort that you're spending in participating with this RAB and the community for its participation. But blessings to all of you. I will miss all of this, but it is time to retire. So I thank you all very much.
Thank you. Best wishes. Thank you, everyone. We will be in touch. Be well. Have a beautiful summer. Bye, y'all.